a terrific, terrific way to kick off the series with all of these mayoral candidates. We are so excited to be able to bring this event to you, and so that you can really compare these candidates side by side. The opening statements will be the first thing on our agenda. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to talk about why they're running for mayor and the experiences and qualifications they bring to the job. We will then look at each candidate's top priorities if they are elected, and then we'll take your questions that you've submitted to us. And there are some that had quite a stack of note cards, so we'll be sure to get to those this evening. The format will be that there will be timed responses, so each candidate will be given an identical amount of time, and the candidates have time cards to count them down. We will have 90 seconds as the maximum length of time, just to get to as many topics as possible. So sometimes if a question is more targeted, we may call for a 60-second or even a 30-second response. Finally, at the end of that Q&A period, each candidate will have 30 seconds to tell you why they should, in fact, be the next mayor of the city of South Bend. Just a quick word on rebuttals. This is not a formal debate. There are lots of candidates, and we want to get to a lot of issues. So rebuttals will be used only if a candidate is mentioned specifically by another candidate by name or obvious reference, or to correct what we are calling egregious misstatements of fact. But we don't expect too many of those this evening. So let's get started. And those of you here in the hall, we also invite you to join us for a networking reception with the candidates and their campaign staff after the close of the forum. Okay. So we are going to start, and we will actually go in alphabetical order, starting with Lynn Coleman with an opening statement. Lynn?
Thank you very much, Dr. Bennion, and to the American Democracy Project, the League of Women Voters, and to all of you here tonight, and especially my lovely wife, Murdy. Thank you all for being here tonight. 90 seconds. I can't do anything in 90 seconds, but let me try. Simplistically, why am I doing this? Because I care, and I want to help. I care about this community. For the last 45 years, I've served this community in a lot of different ways. I was a police officer for 23 years. Had the opportunity to serve in the staff of Mayor Stephen Lickey for 12 years. Worked at Riley High School as a security officer. Volunteered in all kind of programs and projects, and from Special Olympics to Boys and Girls Clubs to education programs for kids. I just want to help. I want to help to strengthen our education process in this community. We need to have a stronger education process. I want to be a part of that. I want to help make sure that we create communities, neighborhoods, where everybody has an opportunity to have decent and affordable housing, not just vacant lots all over the community. I want to help. I want to help try to build and enhance relationships across this community for all of us, black and white, Hispanic, Asian, young, old, gay, straight, instead of causing divisiveness, to bring unity to all of us.
Thank you.
I was looking for it too. I didn't know where it was.
It goes quickly. It's hard to interrupt that sentiment. But cue cards tell us that it's time to move to the next candidate. It goes quickly. All right. So 90 seconds for you, Mr. Critchlow.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bennion. Thank you to the League of Women Voters, the American Democracy Project, IUSB, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm so excited to be talking about our future. And I'm really excited that we have a thriving and growing downtown. But just imagine this. We also have revitalized neighborhoods. We have a strong and healthy public school system. And we're a safer community. That's what the people of South Bend want, because that's what the next chapter in South Bend's future requires. And that's what you, your family, and your neighbors deserve. I've spent the last 10 years working as a project manager in the field of clinical research. I lead a multidisciplinary team of experts. And just like the mayor, I have to let each and one of those individuals do their job. But also like the mayor, I have to keep everyone on the same page, following a shared vision, meeting measurable objectives, and solving problems along the way. Now, I telecommute for my job. I could have done it anywhere in the world, but I chose to do it here. This is where I was born and raised. I graduated from Washington High School. I got my degrees right here at IUSB. This is where I met and married my wife. It's where we've chosen to raise our family. And I want everyone in South Bend to have the same opportunities. And I know that there's a lot of work left to be done. And I know that we can achieve those goals together. But every voice and every neighborhood has to be included in our future. That's why I'm running for mayor, and that's what I plan to do.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
Good evening, Dr. Bennion. Good evening, everybody. I would like to honor our former mayor, Mayor Lickey. Glad to have you here in the audience as we seek to follow your footsteps. And thank you for being here, to everybody here, and to my wife, who is helping me out and going through all of this with me. Linda, thank you so much. It is a joy to be here, back at IUSB. I was blessed to be on this faculty here from 1994 to 2003, where I was one of the part of the faculty members who helped start the social work program here. And so I'm glad to see that. I am glad to be in this opportunity to be your mayor, to look at, to reach out, working toward being that, because of the fact that over the last 12 years, my district, the 6th district, has worked to vote me in 3 different times. We have fought for the people of the 6th district, and we want to share that love not only with the people of the 6th district, but with all of you, what we have done to help build up the city. As members of the zoning committee, we've been working with the whole community. And so that's what we want to do. We wanted to continue to help uplift everybody. As a school social worker, one of the schools I work at is Rise Up Academy. And I told the young people when we were talking to some of them, it's time for us to rise up. South Bend has risen up downtown. South Bend has risen up in so many ways. And we are grateful to Mayor Lickey and to Mayor Buttigieg for all of that. Now we have to continue to rise up. And as your mayor, I want to work with you to continue to rise up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
Thank you, Professor Bennion, and thank you all for being here. I was born and raised on Hoover Avenue, where my parents lived for roughly 50 years. I love my hometown, but for too long, success has meant getting out. We must make South Bend a place where everyone can thrive, from young professionals just starting their careers to families with children and retirees. That's what I want for myself, and that's I know from many conversations on doorsteps, that's what our residents want too. I'm excited about what we've been able to accomplish. I'm proud to have served as Mayor Pete's Chief of Staff and Executive Director of Community Investment. And I'm proud to have his endorsement in this race. Together, we've built a top-level team. We've attracted over $800 million of investments, advanced our neighborhoods, and supported local businesses. Our population is growing again, and our incomes are rising faster than the national average. I'm running for mayor because we have a lot more to do, and we can't stop now. We must continue building on our progress and ensuring that everyone can thrive in our community. I'll hit the ground running on day one to accelerate our growth, create opportunities for every resident in the city, and advance and invest in our neighborhoods, and strengthen our education system with a plan for cradle-to-career learning. I look forward to the discussion tonight of how we can best move our city forward. Thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you for having me. I decided to run for mayor because I've seen many issues that we have here in our city that are happening outside of downtown. I decided to run because a lot of people don't see the life they should be living here. I believe that we all need to be living equally, to live fairly, and to be living well. I believe that the violence here in the city has gotten out of hand and that we need to control that as soon as possible. I also want to fix the lead piping that we have here in the city and to figure out how we can stop that before it becomes an issue and make sure it's not ignored before it becomes a massive issue. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Working in neighborhoods for the last 10 years, I've learned that we can't make effective change without hearing from the people who our decisions will impact the most. 54% of working people in the city of South Bend don't make enough to support their families and take care of them to live in dignity. If we're going to move forward, we need to make sure that we're moving forward together. We will all discuss the importance of a focus on neighborhoods. Our work in District 2, the district I represent on the Common Council, has taught us the difference between economic development, building buildings, and economic inclusion, building people. Development without inclusion prevents everyone from prospering in our city, and that's left 54% of us behind. This has got to change. As everyone's mayor, I will utilize neighborhood associations as our central organizing principle, engaging everyone, no matter their income, race, gender, or any single factor, in prioritizing investments and addressing vital social issues like affordable housing, safe streets, access to quality education, and income equity. Tonight, I look forward to sharing with you what we've already done to increase engagement, organizing neighbors, and allowing their voices to inform our actions will provide equal opportunity for everyone to have success in our great city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
Well, thank you for hosting me, everybody, and thanks for coming, especially in this cold temperatures. Cold temperatures is something I know about because I work outside most of the time, so it is appreciated. The reason I'm running for mayor is I was kind of inspired by our current mayor. I mean, he's a smart guy, and he's well articulated, and I see the work he does, and I see the passion that he has, and I thought maybe I could get some of that and help when he leaves. But I'm basically kind of a grassroots kind of guy. I'm a community service worker, and basically I do things from picking up garbage to like business hospitality, helping people jump their cars, landscaping, whatever needs done. And then I also do some work in the parks. So I have a pretty good vision of what happens downtown from that grassroots perspective. But I'm really excited to have a chance to be mayor, especially with these fine people here. It's going to be a great race and lots of fun, I hope. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I had 5 note cards on this next issue that we'll go to. But first, let's hear what your priorities are. So for each of you, what are the 2 top priorities you will tackle starting on day 1 if you are elected mayor? And we'll start with you, Mr. Critchlow.
Number 1, I think neighborhood revitalization has got to be key. That's my number 1 priority. I think the plan for moving forward has to be comprehensive. And in the end, I think it starts with listening. The biggest complaint I've heard over the years when you're out in the neighborhoods and you're talking to folks is they feel like the city right now is coming to them a little late in the game when it comes to plans or development or things that are happening in their neighborhoods. They feel like they're being brought in for buy-in rather than brought in for input towards the beginning. And I think that's really important because it's interesting. If you go from each neighborhood has different unique priorities. From River Park to the west side of Miami Village. Over here, if you say what's your number 1 issue, it's going to be crime. Over here, it's affordable housing or irresponsible property ownership. And then still in another area, it's flooding and infrastructure issues. So that's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is support for South Bend Public Schools. Has to happen. And there's very specific ways that we can do that. At every kitchen table in South Bend, the same conversation is happening. Where are we going to send our kids to school? And South Bend's losing that conversation. 30% of the student-age population in South Bend attends a school outside of the South Bend public school system. I have specific ways and things that the city can do. I hope we get to it at another question later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, 90 seconds.
Thank you. On January 1, 2020, it most likely will be cold. And so therefore, the people of South Bend will look to the mayor, hopefully me, to make sure that we will be taking care of our streets and making sure that our snow is plowed on a timely basis. I think that's the key thing that when you look at what's the goals that we have to be able to do day 1. And at that same time, we have to also make sure that our sewers and our whole public works system is together, because as we recognized last year in February, when everything came together, with water, with snow, with everything else, those over there in the Lipa Park and other parts of our city and even in other communities found a lot of flooding all over the place. And so already I've been able to talk to people who have been on public works committees in past years, so we can be ready. We can be ready for that and make sure that we can move forward. Yes, we have all these other things with neighborhoods and everything else that we have to do. But in January, snow is the key. Basic services to make sure that we can get to work, get back from work. In order to do the school work, we have to make sure our streets are clean so our kids can get to school and get home. And so those basic services are the key thing that we have to make sure that we do. And if there's any flooding, make sure that we have done everything with our sewers. Because last year, to hear that sewage was coming to people's homes was frightening. So we must be able to take care of the basic needs and then move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
Mayor Pete and I have assembled a great team that knows how to work together and get things done. We'll be ready to tackle education and public safety, two top priorities, on day one. I have a plan for cradle to career learning that makes sure our kids enter school ready and able to learn. The city and South Bend schools are active and engaged partners, and students are connected to opportunities upon graduation. Our goal ought to be universal access to early education. And we can get there over the next few years through the expansion of existing partnerships. We also need to build on the city schools compact with the new superintendent and the new school board members. We need to build a coalition of community partners to establish a summer employment program for the youth. This will set students up for success when seeking full-time jobs upon graduation and keep them from getting in trouble in the meantime. We also need to continue moving forward with our group violence intervention program with community leaders like Isaac Hunt and Lynn Coleman. Every neighborhood should feel safe, and there needs to be trust between the community and the police. Those are the top priorities that I'm excited to get to work on next year.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Day one priorities for me are setting up our students in the high schools for success right after high school. Probably issuing programs in the summer, issuing programs while they're in school, so they're not going outside, they're not doing all these violent acts that are happening in our city. And the second priority I have is also fixing the infrastructure in the city. That includes potholes, the sewage system, and then improving on smart streets. I think by improving the sewer system and making sure we all have accessible clean water is a priority that we all need to have here in the city.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
I have to say, you know, it's never easy to pare down just one or two issues, when the truth is everything impacts each other. And so there's really no way to just say, okay, we got to focus on education in schools, or we need to focus on economic development, or we need to focus on making sure that we have sustainable housing and stable housing in the neighborhoods. So that's why when I talk about these issues, I'm serious about what I said earlier. We're really looking at neighborhoods as a way to get on the ground and connect with people about what the real issues are and actually tap their wisdom and understanding of those issues in order to provide more effective solutions. So if I had to pick one priority, I would say neighborhoods, because that's really going to inform each and every other topic. That includes housing and infrastructure. It includes economic inclusion and how to empower people. It includes reducing violence by building peace. Also, of course, education. When we empower people, we are able to create the conditions through which everyone will thrive. Self-sufficiency is the key to sustainability. The city can't go in and solve everybody's problems. But when we work together, we can get a lot done and move things forward in a way that's more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
A man wiser than myself once said that everyone knows the problems that we have, but finding the solutions is the real answer to our dilemmas. But outside of basic services, I'd like to see more like business incubators here, kind of like the way Notre Dame has set up. I mean, back where I'm from, we have a flea market, and they opened up this flea market for people to sell. And they had like 100 vendors there, and people always flocked in and spent a lot of money. So I'd like to see more of that economic development here. We've done a pretty good job so far, but there's always room for improvement. I'd like to get rid of the slumlords that have housing in South Bend and Mishawaka. A lot of my friends have problems in this area. They shut off their gas, shut off their water, very inhumane kind of treatment. And I hear a lot of that from people that I talk to. And of course, education's a big problem. I remember looking at the ratings of our schools, and they're like in the C- areas, and people are kind of wondering if they should send their kids there when they move here. But that's something I also need to address. But like I'm big into economic development and retaining the people that we have here, even the regular people here that live here, plus the students. I want the students to stay in this area and bring their talents and brains here. And that's pretty much it for now.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you very much. Again, and it's been stated over and over and over, but for me, number one, the first thing we're going to deal with January 1st is education. We have to make sure that we provide strong education for all of our kids, early and often. The city and the school administration cannot operate in silos anymore. We have to be together. And so I would be advocating for a strong relationship between the city administration and the school administration to make sure that we provide resources and opportunities to give all our kids an opportunity for a strong education. Public safety is extremely important. We need to make sure that people feel safe in their communities and neighborhoods, whether they live here or visiting here. We need to make sure that happens. And finally, we have to build relationships. We have to begin to understand each other, cross culture, religions, and all of those places that keep us divided. If we don't come together as human beings, we will continue to fight against those issues that keep us separated. And so both internally and externally, I will begin day one trying to make sure that we understand each other and how important it is for us as city government to provide services to all of our residents. That has to happen, building strong relationships in our community.
Thank you. We have several note cards on this next topic. It says, I have lived in South Bend my whole life. Downtown seems to be doing better, but the homeless population seems larger. How would you approach this issue that people are having? What do you think has caused their homelessness? How would you coordinate services to help these vulnerable residents? And what steps will you take to address this problem? So the topic is homelessness, and what would you do as mayor to address this problem? And we start first with you, Mr. Davis.
First of all, this past year, and really the past few years, working to solve issues of homelessness has been one of the key issues that I have done on the South Bend Common Council. I fought to make sure that we had weather amnesty. We had many of our people in our community who were cold, and I led the charge for that. I also have led the charge when it comes to helping panhandlers, when it comes down to making sure that several of them, like those in areas such as Albuquerque, New Mexico, have had programs such as a Better Way program, where they tell panhandlers, we look at your signs and we see it. It says, we'll work for food, so let's put you to work. And I've advocated for that. Now, will that solve everybody in that situation? No, but I tell people if you bat 30% in baseball, you go into the Hall of Fame. So it will take about 30% of the people off the roads from that standpoint and help people the dignity that they have to increase that. In my role as a student, I'm working on my doctorate at USC, and that's my whole topic there, is dealing with homelessness. And what really started it, I believe, as a social worker, when Madison Center closed, a lot of those services were gone. And some parts of this community have never picked up. We've had Oakland, we've had, there's been the Memorial Hospital, now Beacon has picked up some, but it left that big gap. That's the difference. And that's where I, as a 27-year-old professional that has been out there 27 years in the profession, that's where I've done something. Not 27-year-old, but 27 years in the profession. I wish I was, but 27 years in the profession. Cool. Gray hair now, hey.
Mr. Mueller.
Homelessness is a difficult issue that's confronting cities across the country. We should be proud as a city that the Center for the Homeless is a model across the country. But what the issue that we've been facing the last few years is chronic homeless individuals that we can see throughout the south of downtown. And the city has been more active and engaged on trying to find solutions. They're difficult. Mayor Pete and I had worked on coming up with a strategy to solve the chronic homelessness issue that we're still working to implement. And there were three main components of that. One was establishing an intake center. So you need to get these unsheltered individuals sheltered first out of crisis mode before you can get them connected to services. A lot of these folks have other issues to work through, whether it's addiction or mental health. Get the intake center and then expand the number of permanent supportive housing units scattered, ideally across the county, not just the city, but if we have to lead by ourselves, we will. And then finally, it's to make sure we're coordinating with the Continuum of Care, which is the organization that coordinates all of the different agencies in social services. So that's the three-pronged approach that we want to continue. But in the meantime, we've also got to make sure that the people feel safe in our downtown. I know we've heard a lot of people talk about that, and all right, I'll stop there.
Oh, stop. That man's got power.
Brutal.
Like we may have another question about safety later if I look at my cards. So, Mr. Rodriguez.
We need to, first of all, bring jobs to the city that don't require, or that teaches the homelessness, if they are able to work, the skills they need to work, and we need to get them to work, and we also need to get them in housing, and we need to help them manage their money and have them to be able to work, to be able to buy a house, to rent an apartment, but to just get off the street so they're not living on the streets and hurting the picture of our city, how our city looks. We need to make sure that they're doing well enough on their own that we can go on and help even more people, and make sure, that almost no one's on the street living, sleeping on the roads. We need to make sure that everyone is doing as well as they can be, and if we can't get them to work or they can't work, we need to make sure that they are off the street and in a shelter, and we need to make sure that they are eating and they are drinking water. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Well, one thing I've certainly learned in recent years, again, with this concept of talking directly to the people who you're trying to support and help, is that there but for the grace of God go I. The issue of homelessness, I think, is something that homelessness or housing instability, because I think that's one thing that, we're looking at people who actually are living on the streets, but there are a lot of people who are actually couch surfing, and their situation also isn't, you just never know. So one of the things that we recently held a forum with an organization I work with, the Community Forum for Economic Justice, where, we've had lots and lots of conversations about homelessness, but this flipped it on its head a little bit. We actually had the people who are experiencing homelessness share with us about what their experiences are and what they see as potential solutions. And one of the things I learned from that was that they estimated that in the community of South Bend, 20% of the homeless population actually doesn't have mental health issues or addictions. Oftentimes we kind of paint it with a simple brush. But my thought was, I got really excited. Well, what if we could address those issues? We could end 20% of homelessness right away. One of the things that they talked about was Fort Worth, Texas was an excellent program. And it gave housing first, it had transportation, and I will look forward to sharing more about that program with you the next time. Thank you.
Oh yes, those time responses are difficult when we're dealing with such big issues. Mr. Wright.
Yeah, with the homeless, I agree that we tend to group homeless people into a group that says, like, we assume they're poor, we assume they're mentally ill, we assume they don't have jobs. A lot of them some of them choose not to go into shelters. Some of them can't go into shelter because maybe they have a felony or a record. And I believe some shelters won't allow them in there, so that, their options are lessened in that regard. But I work with a lot of homeless people downtown. We have a great outreach program, and they do what they can to help them. But it's a very complicated problem. Outside the pragmatic issue of like just giving them somewhere to live, obviously they wouldn't be homeless anymore, but some of them would still have some problems. Like back in the late 70s, a lot of people with like even mental illnesses were kind of put back out in the community when they have nowhere else to go. So for those sections of the population that have mental illness, we need to really take care of that. Because I've seen people sleep outside and it was like negative 30 below and they're outside. So maybe they're not like cognitive enough to decide to go find some shelter. Those people really concern me, but we have a few of those in town. But we have a good homeless program here, and I think that's why the homeless come to our area to get help, and sometimes they don't get the help they need. But yeah, hopefully in the future we can get that problem addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you. Homelessness is the end result of some other issues, and we have to deal with those issues. We have to deal with mental health issues. We have to deal with issues of people involved in drugs and alcohol and addictions to get to the root of that. And that's not what city government does by themselves. So we have to make sure that we engage and involve other people in this community. We have to have the hospital at the table. We have to have Oaklawn, and we have to have Epworth at the table. We have to have people at the table that's affected by this every single day. We have to have homeless people at the table to understand what's going on with them, what caused it, and what can we do as a community, not just the city of South Bend, but as a community to help address this problem. To try to do that just, again, in silos, and that's one of our problems in this community. We've done too many things in silos, and we expect everybody to catch up. Time out for that. We have to be inclusive and invite people to the table, be honest with each other what the problem is, and figure out what we can do collectively as one to solve the problem. Because if we don't fix the problem, it's going to spread and cause us other problems. So I think we have to do things collectively to make that happen. Me and you, man.
You've got it. He's looking at those time cue cards now. Mr. Critchlow.
Well, most people are going to agree that it's taken way too long to address this situation. There's always going to be homeless, but in your community, no matter what. But what we're talking about here, as James mentioned, is dealing with chronic homelessness and trying to end chronic homelessness here. I think the Gateway Center is a great thing. It's supposed to be a short-term transitional facility, 4 to 6 weeks. Where are they transitioning to? That's where we need to start. That we need to start with that supportive housing, that permanent supportive housing. And there's two ways that you can look at this. I think, I do anyway, philosophically and economically. Philosophically, I believe that we do have a responsibility to look out for those who need it the most. Folks that don't need a handout, but they need a hand up. And that's who we're talking about here. But economically, it's important for the city as well. Right now, it's estimated that every unsheltered person out on the street is costing up $30,000 to $40,000 in your taxpayer money. That's with EMS services, social work, healthcare, and economic impact. Okay, the scattered site permanent supportive housing would cost approximately $17,000 per person. That's with social work. So if you ask me if we have the opportunity to not only save a lot of your taxpayer money and give people the opportunity to turn their lives around, that's a slam dunk for me, both as a city and as a society. I've been in constant contact with David with Hope Ministries and Steve with the Center for Homeless. I'm ready to hit the ground running on this issue on day one. We have to move forward full steam ahead on the scattered site supportive housing.
Thank you very much.
Bless you.
Our next question relates to something that you've already talked about, Mr. Mueller, as well as other folks here on our panel of candidates today. It says, what role can a mayor actually play in our South Bend schools? Don't they have their own school board and superintendent? And is there anything you could do to improve the learning environment at our schools?
Thank you for that question. They are a completely separate entity. There's no formal role that a mayor has over the school, either the school board or the superintendent. But just like a lot of other partnerships that we build with other organizations or private sectors, we can look to strengthen that partnership. And Mayor Pete and I, we have been working on a schools compact with the current superintendent, and we look forward to building on that, just outlining ways we can work together with the new superintendent and the new school board, and along with our new council that's likely to come next year. So that's, first of all, just outlining what that partnership looks like, and the some of the key takeaways are making sure that we're having regular conversations, making sure that what the city can do is wraparound services, so making sure we have vibrant neighborhoods, making sure that there's after-school programming ability. So the expansion of the Charles Black Center, for example, has allowed for more programming opportunities. But the big thing that we alluded to earlier was, let's make sure that we get early childhood education and get universal access. And the schools would be one partner and one component of that. And then finally, with what I mentioned earlier, with the summer youth employment program that we want to explore with community partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
I think that building partnerships with community members to come into the school or outside of schools at a location, having the kids either read more or do activities that don't seem as boring to them outside of school, so they're engaging more and learning more and advancing their learning more outside of school, so they're not going home and they're not playing all these video games and watching television and just doing things that aren't benefiting them. They need to further develop their education, so we have to start at a younger age, so that when they grow up and they go into middle school or high school, they're doing better on the standardized tests that they're getting every year or every semester. We need to make sure that there is a strong bond between the mayor and the school board, that they're working together and making sure that everyone is getting the education that they need.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Well, as a teacher, I've been teaching in South Bend schools for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of things come and go. What I know is that there's many ways the city can be in support of K-12 education. Working with teachers every day, parents and students as well, we have some answers. The question is, well, we know the city is not going to be involved with the day-to-day management of school life. But a city is responsible for creating the conditions to which an educational system can thrive. A school-city compact is in the works, but currently it's mostly about sharing spaces, logistics, and marketing. And the city can and must do more. The landscape of education in South Bend is changing so fast, no one has a handle on it. Between charter schools, vouchers for private schools, the public schools, magnets, academies. That's why I'm currently working on creating a commission on education that will be a central body for information and accountability for any institution educating children in South Bend, not just the South Bend School Corporation. The commission will uphold the laws protecting children with disabilities and ensure due process and discipline, but also monitor the equitable distribution of resources, including highly qualified teachers, teacher training, and technology. By sharing the responsibility of educating all children in South Bend, we'll make sure every child gets the resources they need to make progress. I will make investing in children the cornerstone of my administration, because primary responsibility of any community has to be the safety and education of the next generation.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I think what we could do for the school board is to give them the resources they need, that maybe we could retain the teachers we have and bring in new talent. Once I tried teaching at one point in my life. I had a bachelor's in psychology, and I wanted to teach psychology. And I did this education process, and they told me I wasn't qualified to teach high school because I needed teaching education methods and some kind of certification. But I mean, if I could change that, I would, because if you know a topic, you should be able to teach it. After all, they're high schoolers, and we have a lot of life experience even as teachers. But yeah, given the resources and supporting them, that's the best way I think that would happen.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
I am a strong supporter of public education, and I think we have to have a strong public education system. I think that a couple things need to happen, and our administration would start working on that day one. I think that we have to have a liaison between the city administration and the school corporation that's working with the school corporation on a regular basis, understanding what's going on, developing that partnership, not just going to a meeting once a month or once every couple of weeks, but on a regular basis to develop that connection between the city administration and the school corporation. We know for a kid that does not get a strong education, he or she is going to end up in the court system, he or she is going to end up homeless, he or she is going to end up as a teenage parent. You know, there's so many things that's going to happen to us, and it starts with education. I would be a strong proponent that we would sit down and begin to investigate having at least a hybrid. We have to consider having maybe some appointed school board members from the city to give us, and I know we're two different entities and it's not going to be a popular thing, but you know, in order to help to heal things, you know, sometimes it's not always healthy and things that we want to do right away, but we have to be able to have a relationship with them, and if we don't do that, we're going to suffer. We know it ain't just me. You got a short clock with me, don't you?
Mr. Critchlow.
Well, as I mentioned, 30% of the student age population in South Bend attends a district outside of South Bend schools. What are we going to look like as a city if that reaches 40 or 50%? How are we going to attract businesses and families to the city? I'm glad that everyone up here agrees that this is an issue. And I'm not talking about oversight. I want to be clear about that. I don't think that is the role of the city. I think the role is to provide support. And the ways they can do that is, number one, every time you open up the page of the Tribune, there's something terrible about South Bend schools. They're forced to compete, and that sucks, and it's wrong. But they are, and that means we need cheerleaders. And as mayor, I know the great things that are happening in South Bend schools. I went to a South Bend school. I send my kids to South Bend schools. So I will be a cheerleader for South Bend schools as mayor. That's number one. Number two, early childhood development. Other municipalities are funding it. South Bend needs to fund it. It has to happen. We can start small and we can scale up, but it has to happen. Not only does it have proven outcomes for children 5, 10 years down the road, but it sends a strong message to parents that we're invested in your child before they even walk into our doors. I think that's important. The other thing is becoming known as a teacher-friendly city. If we want to attract and retain quality teachers to our city, there are programs that we can put in place that will provide incentives to teachers who come to South Bend and stay and teach. I've already been meeting with some business leaders and community leaders and talking about these possible programs that we can put in place. There's a huge appetite for it. We can get the ball rolling on it on day one, and it has to happen. And I'll say one more thing about when it comes to schools and their relationship with the city. When parents are asked to rank what goes into deciding what school they're going to send their kids to, the number one thing they mention is safety, every time. You don't think your city has something to do with the safety around the school? It does.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
Oftentimes when I'm in the grocery store, I have a young person run up to me and they say, "Hi, Mr. Davis," and I see their parents say, hold on, don't you? And they say, "No, it's just Mr. Davis." And the reason they say that is because of the fact that I'm their school social worker. They see me as a school social worker, where their parents just saw me on the TV as a city council person. And the parents were scared to talk, but the child went up to talk. And I see that, and I said, you know something? One of the things that I wanted to continue, and that is not just be ready on day one, but what I'm already doing as a public official, is being in the schools. They need to see us. When we are able to be there with kindergartens and the schools, I've been in 8 schools. When they see us, I saw you on TV last night. I said, what was I talking about? And they tell me what I was talking about, what channel was on. And when I can relate what's going on in this city to a second grader, I know that I've done my job. And we need to continue to help our parents and help lift up our families. Because as we do that, then everything's good. We can put everybody on the board and work from top heavy down, but working from the children up, that's the key thing. Letting them understand who we are. I was a teenager, almost adult, when I got a chance to meet our city leaders. I saw them from afar, but to actually be with them through the day, talk with them, have lunch with them, those are the key things. And encourage our teachers. encourage our teachers and those working in the school system. I'm proud to be a part of the South Bend schools, and we need to market it because we got a lot of good things going on in our school system. Stop. Gotcha.
Dr. Bennion, you
Yes.
said something about rebuttals. I don't know, I felt like there was somebody had mentioned something about we don't need oversight, which is really what my point was. I don't know how that process works in terms of rebuttal.
If it was directed toward a candidate, but
Got
you're
it.
welcome to sneak it into your next response.
All right, I will figure that out. Thank you.
So the next question is about economic development. It says, besides the areas around Notre Dame and downtown, what plans do you have to bring business to other parts of town and to put qualified people right here in the Michiana into those quality jobs? And it goes first to you, Mr. Mueller.
Me again? Okay.
Me,
Uh,
me and that.
No.
Salvador.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Oh, yours, all right.
I think the first thing we should do is bring jobs that are for everyone, put people who have the qualifications to be higher ranked at a job, and then have those who are lower, who need to start learning these skills to get into these jobs. We need to teach them, and we need to get jobs that everyone can fit into, so that way we can all make money here in the city. We also need to bring businesses from outside of our city here to South Bend to make sure that we're all, we need to bring businesses from outside of the city so we can get more money in, and then we also need to help small businesses develop and make money for the small business too.
Thank you very much. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Again, working in community organizations and in neighborhoods, we have increased the engagement of people most affected by redevelopment, and we've been able to change the conversation on many issues to include the voices and experiences of residents whose these decisions are most effective. For example, the 1,000 Houses in 1,000 Days initiative was originally all about demolition, but by strengthening and lifting up the voices of the neighbors through neighborhood associations, we help the administration recognize the value of saving homes through rehab as a way to provide for affordable housing. Tangible accomplishments we fought for and won: $2 million for investment in home repair so residents can stay in the homes they live in, $2 million for investment in construction of affordable new homes so we can build truly diverse and inclusive neighborhoods with income diversity. As mayor, I will also bring together the largest employers as partners to finding the pathways to pay their employees a just wage. Affordable housing isn't great, but at 54% of our people can't make ends meet, they still can't afford what is available. So we'll also be working with partners to tap their supply chains to capture some of the millions of dollars that leave our community every year. Notre Dame, the hospitals, all of these places, they're using things outside, sources outside of our community. So instead, we can tap those chains and provide resources and opportunity to small businesses right here in South Bend.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
Recently, I took a trip out to the west side, down Bendix Avenue, and there's a lot of businesses over there with a lot of empty space. Like, they'll have a little business here, and they'll have like 10 acres of free land that's basically just sitting there kind of dormant. And I'd like to fill those, every acre with some kind of business. Because the more business you have, the more people will come, and more business you'll be able to develop. And the cleaner and nicer the areas, it's more attractive for businesses to kind of fill up that space. So that's what I'd like to see happen. Kind of utilize the space that we have and attract more businesses and people. Since we have the talent here, a lot of smart college students here that graduate and need jobs, I think we could fill them with some internships. A lot of manufacturing, that's what I'd like to see too.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Obviously, economic development is extremely important to a community, but when we go back to the things that we've been talking about, education is one of those key issues that we have to do. We have to make sure that we educate our kids and prepare them to be able to work. We have to invite companies to come here to be a part of this. And one of the things we have to do, I think we have to showcase who we are and what we are, and the things that we've done. We have to sell ourselves so that people want to come to this community. That begins with a change. That begins with a change that we begin to make ourselves interesting for other people to want to come to this town. That there's safe places to live. And education is important. All of those things make it important so that when companies look to come to this town, we're excited. They're excited about coming here. Until we do that, they're going to find other places to go and not come to South Bend. When that happens, then we suffer. We don't have companies that come here that want to pay living wages and those kind of things. So we have to do the work up front to make sure that we attract strong, positive, strong companies to come here.
Thank you. Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, I think we have to continue the public-private partnerships that we know are successful, and we'll probably get into that later with more questions. But those partnerships have to be fair, they have to be equitable, they have to be responsible, and they have to be values-driven. And the reason is, it was mentioned before, 54% of the households in South Bend are struggling, near or below the poverty level. That's an increase over the past 4 years. In African-American households, it's 40%. That's double the national average. In Hispanic households, it's 10 points higher than the national average. That's a big deal. And so you have people out in the neighborhoods who see that their tax dollars are being spent on, frankly, things they can't afford all the time, or things that aren't necessarily for them. And they'd be okay with that when it's being done for prosperity and for growth and for the future of the city. But they're not going to be okay with that if they feel like they're not a part of it, if they feel like they're not included, if they walk outside of their front door and they feel like their neighborhood's getting left behind, like the school they send their child to is falling apart, if they don't feel safe sending their kid to play at the park down the street, the park that they grew up playing in. So when we talk about economic development, I think we really need to be talking about providing economic opportunity, an opportunity for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
One of the key things that we have to continue to do is to look at what is the first impression that people have when they come into the city of South Bend, in the Eastway, north, south, everywhere we are. And I was very glad to help pass a neighborhood plan that, let's see, Ms. McBride here, just look at the South Gateway, the southwest side, the southeast side. As we come into the city on the south side, what's that vision that we see when we first come? And I'm glad that the neighbors on that southeast side are starting to really uplift that area, because that's the first thing you see when you come from the south side. And having businesses and strengthening the whole Ireland Road area is a key thing. We see that now as you come off the bypass with how the casino has helped out everything. Welcome to South Bend. We need to have that throughout the whole city. We don't need to have where people come into our airport, go down to Angela, really not Angela, Diamond, and shoot over to Angela that way. We need to have it where they come in and they see businesses from the jump street. And as we can see that on our corridors, on the west side, on the east side, south side, and north side, that's the strength. We've built up the downtown. Now let's take some of those same keys that we've done with the downtown area and spread them throughout the whole city. Let's tie it all together like the bow tie. And and that's where we have to go. And that's what the whole thing is about. Putting it out there and making sure that the strength is on our corridors and the first impression. Because the first impression is what's going to keep people coming here.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
I'm glad that we've taken downtown development for granted. It's been hard. If you look back before Mayor Pete, there wasn't a lot of development happening downtown. And it's still hard to this day because our population is growing again, but it's not growing fast enough. Our incomes are rising, but we're still below the national average. And so it's tough to get development to happen even in the best markets in the city. And we've also been working to push that development out into the neighborhoods and along the corridors, and that's what we want to continue to do. But you also can't parachute development in by itself. Most of the development you've seen is the vast majority is private capital, in which investors are risking dollars and hoping for a return. And so it's growth in incomes, and it all feeds itself, and we all have the same vision. I think in 2025, 2030, we have a revitalized downtown, we have vibrant commercial corridors spreading out, and we have vibrant neighborhoods around those corridors. And that's what we're working toward. This is a long-term plan. You have to start with the downtown. A city is only as strong as its urban core. Otherwise, if you look at where incomes are higher and where there's more prosperity, it's in denser urban areas on the coast and in cities across the heartland. So this is part of a long-term strategy, and I hope we'll stay the course. And if we do, the whole city will feel it and we'll be proud of where we are.
Thank you very much. The next question says, how do you view the balance between beautification and infrastructure? What's the relationship there? And if you are elected mayor, what will you do to advance a new Green Deal in South Bend?
A new what deal?
A new Green Deal in South Bend.
Green?
Green
Did she say green?
Green Deal.
So beautification, infrastructure, and environment. That's a big question. So at least if we could do.
90 seconds.
So you say,
You can take
Hold
which
up,
part
stop.
that you want,
Hold up,
but
hold up,
is
stop.
beautification part of infrastructure, separate from it, et cetera? And how can we do it environmentally if we want to narrow it down a bit? So
Right.
Ms. Williams-Preston.
okay, thank you. Part of economic development, part of revitalizing our neighborhoods has to be working on that infrastructure. I think critically important is making sure that we prioritize the health and safety of our community. Things like the smart streets, that's important, it looks beautiful. But we learned as a council, right after we kind of finished and celebrated that we have some issues below our streets right now as well. So I think moving forward, we need to begin to think about our priorities and make sure we've got pipes that have been there since the 1800s. And so how are we allocate? We have to think about how we're allocating our dollars to make sure that we're doing those things. The issue about green and being a green city is extremely important, and it's part of the answer to making sure that we have health and safe communities that are sustainable throughout. And years ago, there was a proposal to amend the tax break requirements to include incentives for businesses to build sustainable buildings. As mayor, I'll work with partners in the community to reintroduce that bill and find other ways. There's a wealth of experience right here in our community. People who are not just here for an internship or just to do some resume building, but who have made South Bend their home. And they have expertise in these areas. I happen to work with a president of a neighborhood association whose work as an architect but is focused on sustainability in buildings, landscapes, and neighborhoods. We have people who come to the council on this issue on a regular basis. Again, when we tap the wisdom that's in our community, including all those university folks, we can find the answers together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
Beautification is cheap, I think. Infrastructure is expensive and complicated. I mean, just like planting trees and bushes and plants and things like that, it makes everything more attractive. But even the green initiatives, I'd like to see those, like the green roofs. I'd like to see, like, Notre Dame did a lot with they have pebbles and stuff on top of the roof to help keep things cool, and I guess it maybe attract wildlife. But I'd like to see a lot more green roofs, even for residential areas.
Mr. Coleman.
Let me do this. I have to take exception to some comments that was made earlier that before Mayor Pete came along, downtown was not, nothing was happening. I take exception to that. Mayor Steve and his administration done a lot of work to prepare for the growth that the city is now seeing, and that cannot be overlooked. A lot of dinosaur buildings that was up. Mayor Steve and his administration worked hard to find dollars and resources to get those buildings down to prepare so that we could have a vibrant downtown. And so I take exception to that and appreciate Mayor Steve and all the work that they've done to make that happen. Secondly, I think that to create green spaces and beautification spots in this city is important, but it can't just be downtown. If we don't do that throughout the city, in neighborhoods and communities that are depressed and struggling, we do ourselves a disservice. Because if they don't feel good about where they are and where they're living at, people in those communities don't feel good about where they are and what's going on in their lives, they don't do well and they suffer. And so we have to make sure that we spread the wealth, not only downtown, but throughout the community.
Thank you. Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, I mean, so beautification and infrastructure, like most things, I think they're related. I don't think it's an either-or proposition. If you want to revitalize a neighborhood, that means, you know, a green space in the neighborhoods. It means curbs and sidewalks and streets and, you know, if you're building a park, you need bathrooms, and you want a neighborhood that doesn't flood, so you need to have, you know, make sure that your sewer system's, you know, upgraded and working how it's supposed to be. When you have lights that you're putting in, that's directly related to public safety, right? It might look pretty because you got lights up, but it's also a safer neighborhood. And I'm a big fan of Light Up South End. Councilman Tim Scott and Councilwoman Karen White, I believe, started that program. I think it's phenomenal. I think it should be well funded every single year. So thank you for starting that. But you know, when you build buildings, you're building infrastructure. That causes rain runoff. That has to be dealt with. So I don't think it's an either or, because even when you're talking about sustainability, which is important, and we want to be a city that is known for being green and known for sustainability, because it's the right thing to do for our planet. But it also helps that it makes good financial sense on the back end as well. So I don't really look at those things as an either or. I think they're all related.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
They are all related, and I do agree that we can do both of them. Working with both mayors, Mayor Lickey and Mayor Buttigieg, I've been on the council for 12 years, so I've had the opportunity to work with them both, and also served on Transpo for the last 15 years. And if those of you who have been in our community for a while, you remember the old Transpo building that was right not too far from here. And we moved from that building to a LEED certified building. And I'm glad to have been a part of that board that we did that. People have come in from all over the country to see how we have done something that is not so unique, in the sense that dealing with transit, we made it in a green kind of a way. And I'm very proud of that building over there. Plus, we put it in a place, Ignition Park, and that helped. That was an old situation that had been out there for a while, so we helped to build that area. And so we were able to use a green building and then come back and help the old neighborhood where we were. You see new houses going in that area now, where the transport used to be. And so you're seeing development, beautification, beautiful homes in that area. So you have a balance between infrastructure that's been done in a LEED certified way with transit, and then where we were, you see new homes, development coming in that area. So beautification goes along with green life, and you can do it. It all works in our parks, it all works in everything we do. So being a part of the Transpo, being a part of our leadership has been a very innovative way when it comes to green. And I wore green today, just make sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller.
Is Gary Gelot in the house? That sounds like a
Right?
question from Gary. So one of the reason why I say that is one of the things we're doing with the long-term control plan, trying to renegotiate that. This was a mandate from EPA to limit our combined overflow in sewers, and the price tag was astronomical. You know, if you count financing costs, it would be close to $1 billion, and so that's just not affordable for our community. But we've gone back and looked at, are there alternative ways to get the same environmental outcomes without having to spend nearly that much? And sure enough, we've come up with a plan that does, and a lot of that has green infrastructure in it. Rather than a lot of pipes and a lot of storage, there's a lot of green infrastructure. So we can have both. We can have a cheaper price tag for the ratepayer, and we can have the same or better environmental outcomes, and we can have this green infrastructure. And there's no doubt that we're going to have to adapt to changing climate. I mean, we've seen some, as Mayor Pete likes to say, what are the odds you have a 1,000-year flood and a 500-year flood within 18 months of each other, and something isn't happening? And so this is a reality we're going to have to face on infrastructure, and we already had infrastructure challenges to begin with, and so this is certainly something important for the next mayor to address.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
I believe that the beautification and infrastructure are both related, but we must make sure that the foundation is there to beautify these things that we're doing. We must make sure that everything is there when we build on top of it, not just build on top of it and then later have it crumble to have it all be built again and be wasting more money and wasting more resources, because the changing climate is something that is affecting everywhere around the world, and we must do our part to combat it. I believe very strongly that the more that we do individually, the more that we help fight it together. We should try our best to look into renewable resources to lower the effect that we are doing on the planet and affecting the climate change that we are facing right now.
Thank you very much. The next question, and you'll each have 60 seconds to respond, says, there are lots of things that people want to invest in, but will the city be able to invest in any of it given the impending fiscal cliff? And we start with you, Ms. Williams-Preston.
I can start again.
Oh, sorry. We'll start with Mr. Wright. Thank you for your honesty.
Investing in the community, I think we could do that more on a grassroots level, just helping your neighbor with their groceries, carrying their groceries in, maybe with some good cheer. Investment, I guess investing is kind of complicated. I know people understand investing. City-wise, like, the city has a set budget every year, and they might only have like 10% of the money to work with. So there's always that kind of problem. But I guess you could start investing where you live would probably be the best idea, I think.
Mr. Coleman.
I think that dealing with the fiscal cliff, obviously it's going to be an issue, a problem for us, but I don't think it's something that we cannot deal with. I think that we manage our resources well early. We didn't just realize the day that that was happening, and I think the city administration, current administration, have begun to plan out things that can be done. I think some of the things that we have to look at as we begin to deal with that is the resources that we have currently, and where do we best spend our money to make sure that we don't overspend and we still have resources or revenue to deal with the shortfalls that we're going to have because of the property tax deal that's going to happen behind that. I think we can look at things like staff reduction or moving, and I think we look at ways that we provide services in other parts of the city. I don't think it's an end all. I think it's a challenge, but we find ways to deal with that.
Thank you. Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, you know, I think a budget is nothing but a statement of priorities. If you make it a priority, then you can budget for it. I don't think that the city is heading towards, you know, this calamity. I think that there are big concerns I have in terms of the future finances of the city. But, you know, in the end, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, that we do have new and interesting streams of revenue coming into the city. You know, we Notre Dame is a stronger partner than ever. The casino, the casino agreement that was reached between the city and the Pokagon Band. But generally speaking here, some of the stuff that I've talked about here with the schools especially, you know, we're talking about a community in South Bend that in a matter of a couple months raised $650,000 to renovate the Studebaker Fountain. Vicki, I see you sitting up there. Vicki McIntyre led that effort. Amazing. This community came together in a matter of months to raise, and I think it was a noble project. But, you know, going out and talking to business leaders and community leaders, there's a huge appetite. They have a vested interest in seeing some of these things succeed. So if we can raise money for a noble effort like that, we can raise money to do things like send our kids to early childhood development.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
The 2020 fiscal cliff is something that we have been working on. It's not a surprise. Back in 2008, I was on the council that voted for us to have to deal with our different finances so we will be able to survive the last 10 years. It was not a popular decision that several of us had to take, but those of us who in Lake County and St. Joe County had to deal with the fact that we had to raise property in terms of our taxes. And those funds that we raised during Mayor Lickey, those times at the end of your tenure, that helped save us. That gave us the boom that we have now. And so we've been able to plan for it. So we know it's there. We can look in our 2019 budget and get ready for it, like we have talked about in our budget meeting, and get ready to deal with it. So you're talking about a $2 million deficit from what we've been looking at. And we can definitely overcome that situation by how we handle our priorities and how we move forward. So we planned for it back in 2008, and we had meetings to care for it then, and we can do the same thing in 2020.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
Thank you. Yeah, we're prepared for the fiscal cliff. We've been working with Mayor Pete and the council members at this table and others to prepare for it. It's about $1 million hit to the general fund projected, and roughly $2.5 to $3.5 million to the redevelopment funds. So that does mean fewer projects, redevelopment projects, that can be done. But at the same time, we have been seeing an encouraging trend where, because our incomes are going up, our income tax receipts are also going up. And we've also seen, because there's been more investments around the city, that our property taxes have also been going up because the values have been going up. And there's been, vacant buildings have filled up with new life. So we just have to get through a couple years, but the long-term trajectory is still good, and we're in a sound fiscal position going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
I think we just have to look at the budget and make sure that we are prepared for that when it happens. And we have to make sure that we are making money at the same time to combat back what could happen, what is the worst case scenario that could happen. And we must look at it and try to, at best, combat what the worst scenario could be.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Well, there's many reasons to thank Mayor Lickey and Mayor Pete, and I think this is a great time to do that. My time on the council, I've learned the work that they have done has been really an amazing amount of fiscal responsibility to prepare us for this day. And as had already been mentioned, we really have a plan in place to move forward in a sound way. And so we actually had a conversation on this last night to understand more about where we were. And there was a commitment by the council, and I will continue that as mayor, to continue, now that we've got to focus on neighborhoods, we can't stop. We have to continue to make sure that we're providing development and investing in people and places that we haven't before. We can do that with partnerships. These anchor institutions like Notre Dame, Memorial Hospital, St. Joe Hospital, they have the resources, as I mentioned earlier, by tapping those supply chains, we can do what other progressive cities are doing, investing in cooperative businesses. And this is a way we can continue with that forward movement of economic development.
Thank you. Well, candidates, now we get to our lightning round. I know you bristled at the 90-second limit, but we still have lots of note cards. So we are now at 30 seconds. You can see why we need multiple events with these candidates. So many of you have thanked Mayor Lickey and Mr. Buttigieg. This card says, tell me what one thing would you do differently than the current administration. We start with you, Mr. Coleman.
I think that for me, one of the things that I would do differently is, again, our investment in our school systems, both monetarily and human capital. I think that we have to make sure that that's a priority, and so I would be wanting to spend a lot of time with that.
Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely be making education more of a priority. I'd definitely be making neighborhoods more of a priority. And I think I would make having a better relationship with the Common Council, fellow community leaders all around the county would absolutely be a priority of mine as well.
Mr. Davis.
I will continue to come to council meetings more often because of the fact that you get a chance to hear people live right in the whole session. And I think people, when Mayor Lickey was there, he was there many times right after meetings, and he could hear the questions right being asked as it was coming out. So I liked how that approach was, and it's already on my schedule to come, so I will just continue to keep the same schedule.
Mr. Mueller.
I've been working alongside Mayor Pete for the last 3.5 years, and so a lot of the direction and the vision is also something that I believe in and would like to continue going forward and to build on that progress. I would like to continue moving more resources to the neighborhoods. We have done that, and the 2019 budget has a lot of good stuff for neighborhoods, and the council passed it unanimously, I think, because of that. So we want to continue to do that, and I agree that I would like to continue to strengthen our partnerships with their units of government and South Bend schools. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Probably the stronger education for our children, making sure they're being well educated, making sure they're well developed for the future, making sure that they actually have a future that they can look forward to.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Partnering with schools is something we haven't done before, but what we have done is, with regards to education, is invest in early education, is housing stability to reduce the mobility of our children, citywide literacy, and implementing restorative justice throughout to create a new school climate. What we haven't done, and that's why I'm proposing the Commission on Education, is some sort of oversight, but it's not so much oversight in terms of sticks. We're talking also about carrots. In order to connect with all of the institutions, we have not understood charters, vouchers, and public schools together. That's where we need to go.
Thank you.
The one thing I can think of is the lighting downtown. I don't know who's responsible for that, but people that come to my city and they drive around and complaining how dark it is and they can't see where they're going. I'd like to see some lighting. Maybe put the squeeze on the lighting guys.
All right.
That's what I'm talking about. Squeeze it down. Make it happen.
Trying to picture it. Okay, so let's go. Next question. We'll start with you, Mr. Critchlow. Will you make animal welfare a focus of your administration? And who should control microchip scanner data, volunteer groups or the city?
Well, that's specific.
30 seconds. I'm an animal lover. Welfare of the animals is important to me. We don't have to talk about geese and parks, any of that kind of situation, because we're running in South Bend, not Mishawaka. Sorry for my Mishawaka friends. I'm the type of person who I believe in allowing experts to be experts. So I would definitely need to get together with the experts on that conversation and talk to them about who should be managing the data of the animals and their owners. Zuckerberg should probably be owning who can take care of that.
This is what happens when you do a 2-hour forum.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Davis.
I was on the council again when we passed the bills to what we have right now with our animal welfare. I advocated for our dog parks, and so I'm glad to have done that, and I want to continue. On behalf of my dog, Pepper S. Davis, I would definitely continue to be working with animal welfare and everything else, and so yes. And who should manage that? Pepper's chipped because it's her situation, but so we would have to discuss how we're going to do that, but she is a chipped dog.
Mr. Mueller.
Yeah, this is an important issue, but I don't have the full expertise on this one either. Animal care and control is an entity of the city currently, and I think anytime you think about insourcing or outsourcing an activity in the city, you got to look at there are benefits, and there are always pros and cons to it. And so the question is often a budgetary and an effectiveness questions. And so this particular issue, I can't say I know the budgetary or the effectiveness at play.
Check with Pepper.
Okay.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I also don't really know much about this. Probably I'd have to look into more and leave it up to the experts to see what their opinions are on it.
Ms. Williams-Preston.
I absolutely would make this a priority, and it folds into, in one way, it's because, again, an animal lover, love my dog Paiso, y'all got to give him some love. But this is also an opportunity for us to look at ways that we can invest in reducing violence by building peace. I can see, and there's people who have great ideas about recognizing the connection. We have people who need rehabilitation, all of us. We have animals who need rehabilitation. How can we bring those things together so that we're actually connecting people with therapeutic opportunities? And who should manage it? We need more conversation to understand those issues. Thank you.
I don't want this on YouTube, but I heart animals.
Heart animals.
But yeah, I'd like to see, as far as animals go, like maybe like the no-kill shelters for the Humane Society, and maybe like a registry so we can kind of chip the animals and see who they belong to.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
That's one of those issues that, I would depend on department heads from animal control to lead that discussion for us and make recommendations on the best way to handle it.
Thank you. The next question goes first to you, Mr. Davis. It says, will you support the South Bend ID program that Mayor Pete put in place working with local nonprofits?
Yes, I was there at the press conference. And so I was glad to be there standing next to Mayor Pete when we did that. And so therefore, I want to continue to do that because I do recognize the challenge of when I have lost my wallet. It's amazing when you cannot even identify yourself. At least I could go back and get it. But for somebody who cannot do that, and that's permanent, that's really a challenge. So therefore, I was there. We were advocating there. We celebrated that together right there. And so I will continue.
Mr. Mueller.
Absolutely. This was actually something I worked with Mayor Pete and the council members. There was some debate in the 2016 budget of getting that in, but none of the council members here, they were all for it. But yeah, it's a great program to make sure that people have access to city services and other services they need. And ideally, the state would offer these IDs themselves, but in the meantime, this is an important program.
I've never heard of it.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I also strongly believe in this. I like the idea of it a lot, but I believe that a lot of people, when they first heard about it, were skeptical about it. A lot of people didn't have the information they needed on it, but I think we should expand it more and make sure that everyone knows what is going on with it and make sure they know they're in a safe place when they come and do it.
Ms. Williams-Preston.
I absolutely support it. Regardless of how you came to South Bend, you are a part of this city. And every individual in the city needs the same opportunities because it makes us all stronger. We need to be working as a city to make sure the people who are here can get good jobs, have legal protections, can be able to get a bank account, and not be afraid to work with the police and other safety officials. In the role of mayor, I will work with institutions to accept the city ID. And more importantly, in addition to that, we'll ensure that South Bend police are not used as enforcement for ICE. So, because when people are afraid to go to the police, it makes us all less safe.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I'll leave the IDing to the state and leave the city government out of it, I think. But that's kind of my view on it.
Mr. Coleman.
Obviously, I would support it. I think that's part, for me, that's part of the whole inclusion program, that we include everybody in the community, make sure that everybody in this community feels valued, and if that helps us get there, that's what we need to do. Again, it's about building relationships, and I think that's part of it.
Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, Lynn said it about as well as I could. I 100% agree with it. Would love to see efforts to see it expanded and accepted and be able to be used by more organizations. I know that there is a call for that. There's some discussions for that. I'd be happy to lead that effort. Doesn't matter how you got here. You're here. You're a part of this community, and I want you to stay.
Thank you. The next question says, should Whole Women's Health be able to open in South Bend? It goes first to you, Mr. Mueller.
Now we're having fun.
Yes, this is the law of the land, and they should absolutely be allowed to open. I do support a woman's right to choose, and but at the same time, this is not a municipal issue for the most part, and we try to keep divisive issues out of local politics. And so I try to bring people together on all sorts of issues, even when it's contentious, and that's what I would look to do as mayor.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I also support it. It is a woman's choice to do whatever she would like with her body. And I would be open for having it open here in South Bend.
Ms. Williams-Preston.
I absolutely would 100% support the opening of the women's clinic. It's important that we make sure that people have options for whatever it is that they choose for their life and what works for them. It's an important issue, and I think that it's really part of bringing this community together is going to be around, we're not always going to agree, but we can make some agreements to work well together and make sure that everybody gets what they need.
Mr. Wright.
I'll say I think everyone deserves access to health care. I'm not a woman, and I will abstain from that point.
Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, I would support it. I am a supporter of a woman's right to choose. I think that we should not allow government to stand in the way of that right for women to choose. And we would be supportive and champions for that project.
Thank you.
I'd say it again, I completely agree with what Lynn said. Absolutely, 100%.
A new ticket forming here. Okay. Let us go to the next question then.
Hello.
I gotta look at the people instead of this little list, which ran out of questions since I added the bonus round here.
As much as that was a controversial issue because I was chair of the zoning last year, I did vote for it, the women's care to come to South Bend. And so I voted for it, it's on my record, and I shared my comments for that standpoint because I believe that, again, all different types of options need to be available to everybody here. And so, yes, I'm on record, so you can go check my own record for that. So thank you for allowing me to talk.
Touche, Oliver, touche. Okay. We will then start the next question with Mr. Rodriguez. It says, how will you ensure, this is a big question, but you have 30 seconds, how will you ensure that diverse voices are included in your administration?
I think by going out and listening to everyone and making sure that there is a record of what they say and what they want and what they believe in, being written down when we go out and meet with people, making sure that everyone's included and not just people doing what they want to do for profit, more for people.
Ms. Williams-Preston.
Again, this is another cornerstone of my administration, using neighborhood associations and other neighborhood assets to really reach out and get on the ground in order to better understand what people are thinking, what their needs are, and help have their voices actually inform our actions, because that's the way we're going to make more effective decisions. We need to make sure that that input has impact in our decision making.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I'll say a diverse group of people are stronger than someone who are just the same kind of population. So diversity is important, of course, but I mean, rich, poor, blue collar, white collar, there's a lot of different diversity areas. But I think everyone needs representation, so if I could take one from each group, I would.
Mr. Coleman.
I think we have to do that by engaging people, talking to as many people as we can, face to face. And not only do I think that we have to do that within the city administration, but I think we have to encourage that throughout the city, where the whole city is willing to look at inclusion opportunities for everybody so that everybody in this town feels that they have a value.
Thank you. Mr. Critchlow.
I would insist on diversity in my administration. I might know everything about you, but I don't know what it's like living your life, walking in your shoes, the experiences you've had. I think diversity in my administration would be absolutely essential, and I would engage community leaders on that effort.
Mr. Davis.
For the last 12 years, I represented a very diverse district on the southwest side of town, and I will continue to do that because of the fact that diversity doesn't make us stronger, and that is not only in terms of cultural diversity, but as also in terms of age. One of the things that we have to deal with downtown, too many times when you get to this gray hair right here, a lot of times they've been sent out. And we have to make sure that we have old and young, because old and young come together and make a stronger community. And that's what we're here. And so I would like to continue to do that as I age.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
I'd like to continue the efforts that we've begun already. When I entered as Chief of Staff in 2015, quickly we got the Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Christina Brooks' position, into the budget. I drafted the Diversity and Inclusion Executive Order that Mayor Pete signed that January 2016. And now we have a strategic plan that we're implementing, and we need to continue to make progress on that. When I moved over to community investment, I also created the team Engagement and Economic Empowerment, which is Alkina Aldridge. And so that was an effort to get more input and more feedback from the community. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question goes first to you, Ms. Williams-Preston. It says, will you hire experts who are now not from South Bend for your team? How do you balance the desire to get the best people from the entire world with the desire to give South Bend people a chance?
Well, I think that we're lucky because what we have in this institution, in this city, are a number of really amazing institutions that draw people and talent from all over. And while we have had administrations to tap those resources, I think what we need to do is look again into those neighborhoods and recognize the incredible talent that we have out there. We talk about the brain drain when kids come to school and leave. One of the pieces of brain drain, and it's about diversity, it's about engaging people, is when we don't look into our neighborhoods and see the value and the gold that's out there and the wonderful ideas for actually solving some of these issues. It also keeps money right here in our community rather than paying consultants outside the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I'd pretty much do whatever I had to get these talented people here. If I had to go to Google and poach some of their people, I'll do that. So I give the people of South Bend a chance too, but if I could find the best people, I will.
Mr. Coleman.
I think that there's talent here in this community that we have to make sure that we take advantage of. I talked to a young lady last night that she's a student at IUPUI. She's from South Bend, and she's talking about going on after she graduates. And we talked about coming back to South Bend, but we have to give them something to come back to. We have to make them feel comfortable and welcome to be able to come back home and to be a part of this community. So I wouldn't be opposed to hiring someone from outside of the community, but I'll be honest with you, my first look will be within.
Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, I know it's difficult attracting and retaining quality folks. The turnover rate in the city administration right now is very high. For me, I'm absolutely convinced that there are people right here in this community that not only are extremely qualified to do the jobs that need to be done here, but are also extremely committed to doing them right here where they grew up, where they're raising their families. So in the end, you want the most talented and qualified people you can get, but I believe that commitment piece is extremely important.
Mr. Davis.
I want a doctor from South Bend. I want somebody who's for the firefighter from South Bend. I don't want a firefighter coming all the way over from Chicago to put out a fire in my house. And so therefore, we have to have talent right here. We have to have the best right here. We have to have trained right here. And at the same time, with the internet, with everything else, we can reach out to have other people. But again, we have talent in our town. And of course, we're right here at IUSB. And so therefore, I'm proud to go with any of the social workers that I have taught or who've been taught here in this town. I think we have the great talent, and let's move forward. Stop.
Mr. Mueller.
Yeah, retaining and attracting a talent is what we need to do as a city and what we need to do as a community and even in the private industry. And so we can't relent off of that. But obviously the choice often, whether you're doing contracting or hiring, you want to choose local first if you can. And if you can't, or if you're not getting folks in the pipeline, we need to figure out why don't we have these and what can we do to make sure that our local residents can compete more broadly.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I believe that we have the people here, the experts here in South Bend, to help with whatever situation here or we need here. We have the best people probably in the entire nation, the world, to help with these things here in South Bend.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read this next question exactly as they are written on the note cards. What about our streets? Street paving? When? It goes first to Mr. Wright.
I'll be over at your house promptly with some asphalt and a little powder. Thank you.
Mr. Coleman.
I'm sorry.
We ready?
Yep. Are you going to do it personally?
I think that's all part of delivery of service. We have to make sure that we put ourselves in a position where we deliver quality service to all our communities, and streets are part of it. It's not as easy as going out tomorrow saying that we're going to redo a whole street, but I think we have to make sure that we maintain our community as best we can, and paving the streets is part of it.
Mr. Critchlow.
Talked about a lot of fancy stuff up here, but it always comes back down to streets and potholes.
It does.
I think having the street paving schedule is important. It's important for transparency. It's important to show fairness in what's going on in the city. But as far as focusing on street paving and increasing it, I think that goes right along with neighborhood revitalization. And I think that's probably what the question's asking about. And I think that is important.
South Bend is not the only city to deal with potholes. The whole Midwest is having to deal with that. And so we can look at what other cities. Indianapolis right now is looking at the same time because they have similar problems. And so they have hired a different company to work along with their public works department that is helping to not only pave streets at a faster rate, but for them to stay at a longer level of being there in terms of them being paved. And so we need to look at what companies that they use in Indianapolis and bring that here, right here in South Bend, because to my knowledge, some of the people who've been working with Indianapolis live right here in South Bend. And why should they go all the way down to Indianapolis when we can do the same thing right here in South Bend? So I'm ready to do that day one.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
There are funding issues with our infrastructure. We have enough funding to pave the road every 80 years, and until we find asphalt that lasts 80 years, it's going to be a challenge. We have to figure out how to get more resources there. The state increased a little bit. I think we went from every 100 years to every 80 years when they made the change a couple years ago. But as vehicles become more efficient, you get less gas tax revenues from the state, so we've got to figure out a new solution, and it's a challenge, but growth and having growing population and income, well, you'll have a broader base to get the resources needed to fill in our infrastructure.
Mr. Rodriguez.
We need to fill the holes or pave them as quick as possible, because a lot of people are they run into them and their tires get damaged, which is costing them a lot of money. And I know almost all of us probably don't like wasting money that we don't have to. Especially if you just got a new tire and you just run over and it bends your rim, it costs a lot of money, and I know it's not sometimes the best choice.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Well, this goes back to priorities and budgeting, and we need to be informed again by what our people are telling us we need. It's about investing in neighborhoods, and I think, again, we have said that this is definitely something we need to do. This problem is also an opportunity. What can we do in terms of people, local communities, small businesses, again, that we can engage to get right into our neighborhoods and work on those issues, because often those neighborhoods behind, those streets behind the corridors don't get it. We need to look at schools and their CTE program. How can we partner?
Thank you. This is the final question before closing statements. It says, what can the city do to check if contractors are actually paying their required benefits? And it goes first to Mr. Coleman.
I think there's programs out there that would make contractors show their ledgers on who they're hiring and how they're hiring them and that kind of thing. We want to make sure that contractors that work for us are not scamming us, if you will, with the whole issue of charging us one thing for services they're not providing. So I think we have to make them accountable. Accountability is extremely, extremely important.
Thank you. Mr. Critchlow.
Yeah, I agree. Accountability is important, and ensuring that contractors are doing what they said they were going to do along the terms that they were given. And that's a reference to tax abatements. And every year they have to file these reports, and South Bend has a smaller now team of inspectors that are supposed to be going out and checking these things. And I think it's absolutely crucial to ensure that contractors are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing and according to the terms and the values that we have as a community.
Mr. Davis.
When people tell us that a contractor is not doing their job correctly, we need to take that work and make sure that we follow up on that. Because oftentimes the problem has been that the government knows that this contractor is not doing work. And so we have to make sure that we follow up on it and then make sure we don't use them again. And the more we do something local and the more we hire people local, the more we know who they are. Because people who are here, we can relate to a lot better than people who are coming from other places. We could just monitor how many people they're bringing on their buses.
Mr. Mueller.
think I may have misheard the question, but on every public works project, we have an inspector to make sure that the work is done and the materials are used. I thought the question was about contractors that weren't registered with the building department or what have you. And there, we've created a new position in the 2019 budget that's specifically focused on making sure that people have the proper licensing and registration. And that's something I hope to implement later this year. It would fall under the Department of Community Investment.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I think keeping a close eye on what they're doing and making sure that they're following everything correctly, and also making sure that if they don't do it, also don't use them again.
Ms. Williams-Preston.
Well, when we talk about behavior change, that only happens with accountability. So we have to make sure that we're following up on any of these contracts, especially if a company is getting a tax break. In fact, when they come to us to ask for that tax break, we have already, as a council, and I think it's good form to move that forward, ask them to put right up front in their presentation what exactly is the community benefit. And when we're going back to score them, we need to, make sure that they are actually living up to these things. So if we need to hire more people to get that done, that's what we need to do.
And Mr. Wright.
I want to give a shout out to the USW. If they hired union contractors, they wouldn't have that problem.
Right on. I heard that.
Okay, we now come to time for closing statements where each candidate will have 30 seconds to tell us why voters should pick them to be South Bend's next mayor. And continuing with our order of rotation, Mr. Critchlow, we start with you.
Well, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for being here. Thank you all for coming tonight. And I think we've had a great discussion on the topics that we think are important. And what I've talked about is providing economic opportunity, revitalizing neighborhoods, a safer community, and providing more support to our South Bend public school system. And I've talked about some of the specific ways that we can get there, because the next mayor has to recognize that these are the priorities and be willing to roll their sleeves up and get that job done. And working hard is what I've done every day of my life, and I want to do it for you and for South Bend as your mayor. So if you remember one thing from tonight, remember this: the only way we can achieve these goals is together. So I ask for your support on May 7th to ensure that every voice in every neighborhood is included in our future.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Bennion. Thank you all for coming. It is truly an honor to have served you all for almost 12 years. And there's a reason why the people of South Bend in the 6th District have continued to vote for me 3 different times and who have been there for almost 12 years. And that's because I answer my phone, I check back, I get back with them. And I have fought for almost every single person in this district, from whether the 6th District, 5th District, 3rd Districts are all around town, whether zoning and everything else. That's what I continue wanting to do. Answer your phone calls, help you out, be a personal person to you, and be your mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
We can't wait to continue building on our progress. We're getting things done with Mayor Pete for years, and I'm proud to have his endorsement. And we have a team that's ready to deliver on day one. If you like where we're headed, please join us. There's a table back there, or you can go to MuellerForMayor.com and sign up. Let's build on our progress together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
I hope to raise awareness on the issues that aren't being looked at as much in the spotlight, and I hope to raise awareness for everyone else who doesn't really have a voice in our city. I hope that we will listen to everyone else as a city as a whole and not just parts of it.
Thank you. Ms. Williams-Preston.
Vote for me because I get things done. In the short time that I've been on the council, you can see, touch, and feel the difference in District 2. And I'm ready to use those same models of engagement to spread that all over the city of South Bend. I have already been working on and been engaged in with the partners to address issues of housing in neighborhood development, in the schools. That's a strength of mine. Also, reducing violence. These are all critically important things, and I'm the candidate that will get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
When I'm elected mayor, I'll fight for South Bend. Thank you for coming.
And Mr. Coleman.
Thank you very, very much. Thank all of you for joining us tonight, for giving us an opportunity to address you. 40 plus years I've served this community, a lot of different ways. Not done yet. Okay, I want to continue to serve this community, to be able to provide opportunities for all our kids so that these young men here will have the same opportunities and chances at life as their parents did. That's what it's all about. We're doing this because we care and we want to help. We want to help all of you. And I think if you elect Lynn Coleman as your next mayor, you'll see the inclusion that we've talked about. You'll see the growth in this community where everybody is having an opportunity to serve. Thank you very, very much, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How wonderful it is to have so many candidates wanting to take a leadership role in writing the next chapter of the history of South Bend and helping to gather with us all to do that. On behalf of the American Democracy Project and the League of Women Voters of the South Bend area, I want to thank you for attending. Invite those who are here with us in person to join us outside in the hallways for some refreshments and some chat with the candidates and their campaign staffs. Please remind your friends and neighbors to register before April 8th and vote on or before May 7th. And let's close with one final round of applause for our